Welcome to our vlog, tentatively titled Between Two Clouds.
Yep.
It's going to involve a little bit about cloud, a little bit about DevOps, a lot about Google, and potentially drinking some beer. So today I think we're going to kick off with episode 1. We want to talk a little bit about a trend that's facing a lot of enterprises, not just in Australia but globally, and that is really choice between different clouds or different platforms for delivery. One of the things that spurred the ongoing conversation, which inspired the vlog, is looking at a recent report, a few months old now, from Flexera, which is really about state of the cloud for 2019. And it was a survey of over 700 enterprises and had some very interesting stats in it, Troy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Those are usually just in the US, though. I mean, locally. So,
yes.
Well, how does that apply to Australia?
Interestingly, though, this one was a bit more diverse for once, which is great because we're not all American.
Yeah.
I know it's hard to pick my accent, but clearly not from the US. 20% actually of respondees were from APAC.
Yeah.
There were a bunch of people from the UK as well, from EMEA. So it was pretty well rounded. The other great thing about the demographic is you had, not only enterprise users but also some SMB and startups as well.
Right.
But they also did a lot of splitting out the data, so you could see only the enterprise respondents or only the SMB respondents.
Yep.
So it was actually a pretty fair summary.
Yeah.
The respondents as well, all across the wheel, from kind of executives down to kind of tech guys as well, and engineers. So it really was a good broad cross section.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the most interesting stats that I drew out of there almost immediately was around 84% of people have settled on a multi-cloud strategy.
Yep.
The way they defined that was including, private, public, or more than one public cloud was essentially what they determined multi-cloud.
And these were actual plans to deploy multi-cloud, not just future state or strategy.
Yeah, so 84% was people that were actually deploying multi-cloud. There are some other interesting stats around what clouds people are planning to use, which I think we'll talk about a little bit later. Mm-hmm. The really key thing for me, though, and I think for our between two clouds conversation, is really the average number of clouds being basically 2 clouds per enterprise, which is we're seeing up to 3 or 4.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, right, there's vendor dependency lock-in, right, that is a massive concern for organizations. There's leapfrogging features. There's resilience. I mean, we've had outages. A lot of companies need to be sovereign and be inside Australia, so that resiliency is huge, even with multiple zones. And then choosing the best cloud vendor with the best APIs and the best sort of tooling as well for your organization is super important. So multi-cloud is going to be bigger. You can't just put all your eggs in one basket. You could maybe 5 years ago when there was only one player, but now there's a lot of choice and there's a lot of differentials.
Yeah, look, I think it's interesting. Resilience and dependency is often looked at with a technical solution in mind. But the really interesting thing is when one vendor has you over a price barrel, right, you're in a bit of trouble.
Well, exactly, yeah. And I've seen enterprise organizations try and continue to negotiate these big enterprise contracts for cloud, and that's sort of antithetical to what cloud is meant to be, which is that give you that ability to pay as you go. We're still seeing in Australia a lot people thinking they're getting a sweetheart deal with their enterprise contract because it's getting all this extra stuff bundled in, but in fact they're getting locked into pricing, which is 2 years down the road is actually a much worse deal than you can get off the rack. So it's something to keep in mind with multi-cloud is to have that independence and not try and get bought into these long-term contracts, because it reduces your flexibility.
Yeah, good point. Look, one of the other things I thought was worth spending quite a bit of time on in the discussion was multi-cloud versus hybrid cloud versus polycloud. So if we look at hybrid cloud, it's a term that's been around, I think, when VMware 10 years ago when I was there was actually using that term to talk about, hey, we're in this cloud game too, because there's on-prem private cloud and then there's public cloud, and there's ways that you can interchange workloads between the two. I think we can discount that because most enterprises have actually figured out that they're going to need public cloud. It's just a question of the private cloud and how that fits in. So it's really more, I think, for this conversation for us, for our interest area, polycloud and multi-cloud. And if we look at multi-cloud as just being capable of using more than one cloud, that's kind of the first thing, and that's where a lot of organisations are kind of, I guess, dip their toe in the water.
Yep.
Polycloud's the interesting one to me, and I've got to give some credit to ThoughtWorks, where I first saw it, the term dubbed, and also, you and G. Lynn for putting me onto the original blog on ThoughtWorks as well. Thanks for that. Polycloud being about going very deep in a particular cloud to actually leverage the features that are special to that cloud.
Yeah.
Maybe you can talk through a couple of examples and give us some examples of key services you think are important.
Yeah, so things like Google's BigQuery, right, gives you that ability to go deep and fully leverage almost business-facing applications to do analytics and big data querying when you don't want to build all that infrastructure. We tried that sort of 10 years ago, maybe 5 years ago with massive Hadoop clusters, and it sort of fell in a heap. So you don't pay for that. You pay for, and you use PaaS and IaaS services for your core features, and then the stuff that you're using for the analytics pieces, like with BigQuery, you want to leverage the vendors for that. And
so have a managed cluster, not a cluster.
Definitely. Yeah. And then your core business stuff, right? And that's really where it gets into your serverless, right? And making those choices about whether or not you're going to use serverless for workloads, or you go back to your IaaS, or which parts of that PaaS. And that's something really needs to get bubbled up into business as well. Yeah. And it's super important for the business to understand what those trade-offs are between all these, serverless all the way down to IaaS, and making those choices about long-term delivery as well as speed to market, and so that's really important.
Yeah, it's critically a business decision, right?
Yeah,
it's up to the business to decide that trade-off.
Yeah,
important point. So I guess one of the other things that I noticed in the report was talking about which public cloud vendors are actually being chosen, and this is what I was referring to before in terms of future state. So if you look at which clouds are we using now, plus what are we either actively experimenting on or actually plan to use over the next year, I think you had around 90% AWS, around 80% Azure, and then around a 60% GCP. So compared to the statistics of what we're seeing currently in market, there's a huge upswell towards that GCP platform.
Yeah.
So you mentioned BigQuery as being one thing, but I guess the other key thing that we should talk a bit about is abstraction through containers.
Yeah, and Google's, I think everyone knows that, well, not everybody, but a lot of people probably have heard that Google's been running containers for 10, 15 years, right? That's how they've built their entire
$7 billion
infrastructure.
a week or something, right?
That's why they open sourced Kubernetes. That's why they've done all the stuff around the container, because that's how they've been able to scale. Because they are the actual cloud platform, really. It's just that they've only made a public one available retail to people, fairly recently. But Microsoft, AWS, these guys actually were trailing behind Google in terms of the feature set. Yeah. So, and containers are massive. Google's been doing it for years. There's GKE, which is leaps ahead for container management and orchestration. So it's super important to understand those differences when you're making choices around containers, and understanding how those containerization of your apps and whether or not you go serverless. And again, that business decision needs to be a business decision about that.
Yeah. I think you also settled on a rather special term for Kubernetes just recently.
Yeah.
Do you recall what that is?
Kubernetes, no.
I believe you said the industry has settled on it, and it's indeed the cloud within the cloud.
Well, that is what we're doing. I mean, it's everyone wants that independence. They want to put core important business logic that is important for their business. They don't want to go necessarily serverless. That's for speed.
Yeah.
But they want that core stuff to be within stuff that's portable, still gives them speed, but it can't be vendor locked in, and that's where containerization, especially Kubernetes, which is sort of one out all of the around the core container orchestration. So that's super important for your business. And so what Kubernetes has done is really been that cloud independent, which will allow you to move in between clouds with that workload, with that critical workload.
Okay, great. I hope I can attribute that title to you.
Cloud on a cloud? Yeah, it's turtles all the way down.
Fantastic. Well, that sets us up really nicely for the second episode, where we have a mystery guest coming from a company starting with the letter G. to talk about their approach to multi-cloud and containers.
Yep, and
Anthos
on-prem as well as the other clouds,
Indeed.
and managing your containers and your Kubernetes infrastructure across that polycloud, on-prem, and that whole ecosystem.
I think we'll need a bigger couch for that episode.
Definitely.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, cool.
Thanks.
See you later, guys. Thanks
See ya.
for watching.